My hope is that we can live in a world where people are kind to each other, cooperative, caring, and that's the winning social strategy, so to speak. But we can't help but observe that a lot of kind of antisocial people seem to get to the top.
Okay, life can be crazy. You're feeling like you're sinking, just trying to find a meaning. It's time for better thinking, yeah, better thinking. Time to tune in. Let's go.
So excited to be sharing this episode, talking with Professor Joseph Ciarrochi. He talks about his work, his research with adolescents and how they deal with difficult people. Really exciting and brilliant research, I must say. I've certainly learnt a lot myself. Lots of applications for not only young persons, but for the adult world. We're asking a question here about, does it prove valuable to go out and be antisocial? It's a big question because we often go out and hear about those who are not so pleasant, not so nice, and can be harsh with others getting ahead in life. Joseph goes out and answers those questions. Remember, if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the podcast. Today, I'm really excited to be speaking with Joe Ciarrochi. He is a professor, university professor, book author, and a speaker, along with a researcher. And he's got a ton of knowledge, experience, and evidence-based work behind him. And today we're going to be talking about how do we go out and deal with difficult people. So I'd like to welcome Joe.
Thank you, Nesh. Good to be here.
Tell me a little bit about this topic of working with difficult people. You mentioned just before that it's been on your mind in terms of, we all encounter difficult people and how do we go out and work with them, or how do we interact with them? It's been something that's kind of, been present in your mind for a little bit now.
Absolutely. I mean, it started out with a question. I mean, have you ever known someone who's like mean towards others and unethical, and yet they seem to succeed in life?
It's very frustrating.
You know what I mean? Like a lot of bad people seem to get ahead. I mean, think about back when you were in high school. Do you remember kids who were mean and bullied others and yet were still popular? And for me, it's just like, as a person I'm fairly pro-social, cooperative, kind, I just kept observing this and thinking, what is going on here? What is wrong with this picture? So I tried to understand it through research and through a lot of work I've been doing. And I'd love to chat a little bit about what I found in that research. The basic question was, does meanness triumph? Does being aggressive and hurting others sometimes work in your favor? Because that seems like a lot of people do succeed when they're like that. So I guess I could just talk about that research initially.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us a little bit about even the methodology, briefly, so we understand how it came together and obviously the findings.
Yeah. Well, look, as I was saying, my hope is that we can live in a world where people are kind to each other, cooperative, caring, and that's the winning social strategy, so to speak. But we can't help but observe that a lot of kind of antisocial people seem to get to the top. So I decided I'd do a study, and my focus has often been in adolescence. So we can capture adolescence, this little micro world in high school. We can look at kids who are antisocial, and that means they're aggressive, they deliberately hurt people, and they break the rules. And we can look at pro-social kids who are very empathic and kind. And we can see what happens to them in school. We were really interested in looking at how they went in the friendship game. So when you're in school, you know what it's like. You want to be connected to other people. You want to have friends. Sitting by yourself is absolute suicide. So this study looked at, how did being aggressive and how did being kind and pro-social influence the number of friends you had? And we were really interested in this topic of same-sex friends versus opposite-sex friends, because we suspected, is it true that people like women like bad boys and bad boys like bad girls? Is there something about the bad boy or the bad girl that's attractive? So that's what we set out to look at. Are there benefits to being antisocial? And so you kind of start off with this idea that's taught in school that, being kind is the winning strategy. So if most movies, if you watch movies, they will focus on, usually there's some bullies in it and they're mean and they seem to win, but eventually the kind kid prevails. And that
Sure.
there's lots and lots of movies like this. So this is the common theme in these movies. And so is that true? This is actually what's taught in schools as well. Kids are taught to be nice and play well. And if they do all those things, then they will get ahead. That's the message.
And we want that to be true, right? I mean, in our ideals, we want to think, that being kind wins. Maybe someone does get ahead at the start, but I'll eventually get there so long as I'm true to my values and I'm a good person. That's the
absolutely.
ideal, right?
That's what we want. But you might be a cooperator, so that might be how you think. But a bit more antisocial might just be thinking, "Oh, what a sucker." If you look at how, what people have argued, and Adam Grant wrote this best-selling book called Give and Take, and he looked at organizations and he classified people as givers or takers. So givers are the people who, in the workplace, they sacrifice their time to help others. And so there's a bit of a cost to being a giver. Takers are the ones when there's a job to do, they'll let other people do most of the work and they'll take the credit. And he looked at these, and what he found was that givers tended to be the ones who actually succeeded in the workplace, not the takers. In the long run, what would happen is the givers would form these strong alliances with other people, and the takers would eventually kind of lose out. People would know them for takers, and they wouldn't get promoted as much. So this is kind of like the ideal story for me. It's like fantastic because I'm a giver. I want to live in this world. I really want to believe this is true.
This is music to my ears. I'm loving it so far.
Yeah, but I mean, the problem is you do see a lot of antisocial people succeeding. We can't deny this. And I think we need to kind of understand that. You see a lot of movies, for example, characterizing bad boys, like we're talking about adolescents or bad girls, as being charismatic, interesting, sexy, fun. They're also socially dominant, right? So there could be a lot of benefits to being like that. And so I'm focusing on the adolescent context, but I think we could talk about how this might relate to adults as well. And so the question I wanted to investigate here is, almost Machiavelli's quote, is it better to be feared than loved if you can't be both? Is there some benefit to being feared? And, when we talk about aggression, we often talk about it as something that's it's problematic. It's like a deficiency. It's a sign of low self-esteem, especially in adolescence. It's a sign of weakness or something like that. But if you actually look at the animal world, right? When people study animals and hierarchies, aggression is just seen as another strategy. Cooperation is a strategy. Aggression is a strategy. Two lions are trying to dominate, and one wants to be top of the pack, right? So you could see aggression as just a strategy that works or doesn't work. And so that's the kind of approach we took. So you go into the schoolyard, right? And the schoolyard you can see as like a jungle. Kids are fighting for resources. In this case, the resource is friendship. If you're a kid who's friend with those tough kids, then nobody messes with you. You're safe. If you're a kid with no friends, you are totally screwed. People will make fun of you, pick on you, bully you, right?
Yeah, you become the target.
Absolutely. So you can think of friends as the resource that everybody's fighting for, right? And so we did this big study across 6 years, looking at adolescents and their use of social strategies and how that led to friendship. And we identified 4 different types of adolescents. One type was called the cooperators. They basically were empathic and kind, and they almost were never aggressive. So these are the good kids. And then you had the antisocial kids. These are the bad kids. They didn't have any empathy, and they were quite aggressive. And the other 2 groups are in some ways the most interesting groups. You have what's called bi-strategic strategies. So these are people who are willing to use both kindness and cooperation, but also be aggressive when they needed to be. And in some theories, this is supposed to be the best combination, right? Because if you're bi-strategic, you can be cooperative and build groups, supportive networks when you need to. But if you need to go against the group, you can be aggressive. So in a way, it sounds like you're the most flexible person, right? And finally, there was one group which I really identified with, which didn't use pro-social strategies or antisocial strategies. They were basically non-strategic kids. And these kids, I'll just tell you the end for these kids, were pretty much invisible to the opposite sex. So kids that were just, I try to imagine them because I was like this kind of kid. These are the kinds of kids that are, as a boy, we would be sitting around painting figurines of dragons and things like that. Or playing Dungeons and Dragons. Like that was the kind of kid I was. Non-strategic. I wasn't really aggressive. I wasn't really able to talk to people about their feelings. I didn't really have any strategies, and I just kind of, non-strategic. And it's like a peacock with no feathers. Somebody who's no social strategies is invisible to the opposite sex. And that's what we found. We found that those kids, boys and girls who were non-strategic, tended to not have many opposite sex friends. So that was kind of interesting. But what I really want to kind of talk about, because this is the real test, right? It's a test. So we said Adam Grant said givers win. Machiavelli said, no, you better be aggressive sometimes. At least be bi-strategic and a bit manipulative. So bi-strategics win. So you have these two clashing philosophies. Bi-strategic versus cooperators. Who wins friends? And we got to look at this question across 5 years of high school. So it was a longitudinal study across high school. And I really want to focus on these two groups because it's not a straw man. The bi-strategic kids, the aggressive, tough kids, research suggests they might be seen as cool, attractive, fun, charismatic, all those things that would, for example, attract the opposite sex.
Even when you're speaking about it, I'm wanting to be bi-strategic in my head. I'm saying, that's the one I want to be. I wish I was a kid and I was bi-strategic.
Oh no!
It almost sounds like that's going to be the one. So I'm interested to hear more.
Yeah, and I'm trying not to paint the aggressive behavior as a straw man, as something you don't do. Should be a good kid. I mean, I think our schools don't recognize that aggression is a real strategy that kids use to get real stuff like social prestige and power. We treat it as just a problem, and we say you should even include the bullies in your groups and be kind to bullies. There's a sense that we should always cooperate no matter what. Well, the bi-strategics don't do that. The bi-strategics cooperate sometimes, but they're aggressive sometimes.
Yeah, they have a line, right? Is that how I understand that? They have a line, and if need be, they can call it out and say, I'm not going to cooperate right now because I have a different stance on it.
Yeah, what you're describing is a bit more subtle. Maybe we can talk about that afterwards. So what we measured was actually aggression.
Okay.
What you're talking about, I think, is assertiveness. I wish we would have measured that because that's a more adaptive form. What we're talking about is actually people who are selfish and want to hurt others.
Okay. Well, then in that case, I don't want to be
I make it sound nicer than it is. Because I was really interested in genuine, not good behavior.
Yes, aggression is aggression. Okay. Yes.
I mean, you're
it's
absolutely
not
right.
Assertiveness. It's more of the I'm going to go out and hurt someone, in somewhat a deliberate way.
Yeah. So this definition of bi-strategic was they could be empathic, they could listen to you, they understand you, but they also could try and hurt you.
Okay. That's different. Sure.
Yeah. So I'm trying to pick something that is like everybody would say, oh, that's terrible. Of course, obviously that's a bad thing. And we're trying to see if that is so obvious.
Yes.
And so, what I'll do is I'll pit Machiavelli, who said, it's better to be feared than loved, against Adam Grant's idea that it's better to be loved. Right. So we'll start off. I'll just kind of walk you through this. So the first thing is that, like I said, we could classify people into these four groups, kind of cooperators or empathic kids. We'll call them pro-social, antisocial, bi-strategic, and non-strategic. And what we found was that they were pretty stable. Like they used those strategies pretty consistently throughout high school. There wasn't much change. Antisocial behavior is one of the most stable things I've ever seen. That doesn't mean it can't change. There are changes, but it is fairly stable. So that's the first thing. So what we do now is what we're going to look at is just compare bi-strategic to the pro-social kids. Let's see who wins out. And what we had was that kids in the year group nominated other people as close friends. So close friends. So this is actually not me being, let's say I'm a kid that's bi-strategic. I hurt people, but I'm also nice sometimes. It's not me saying how many friends I have. It's how many people around me say, yeah, I'm Joseph's close friend. So it's kind of,
Yes.
it's almost objective. And so the first thing we found was, so we divide it into junior high, which is grade 8 to 10, and senior high, which is 11 to 12. And what we find is that the bi-strategic kids did get an advantage initially. So they get more opposite sex close friendships than pro-social kids. So the kids are being mean and aggressive and hurting others actually have more opposite sex friends. This is true for girls and boys. Then
Isn't
the kids
that incredible?
then the kids who are always being nice. Yeah, that sucks, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I'm a scientist, so I have to go, and look at this honestly. I can't just, make it up.
Yeah.
So that kind of sucked. But what was interesting was what happened over time. So initially, I think those kids that were aggressive and empathic were seen as cool, charismatic. Especially when you enter junior high, it's scary. I mean, and you just want to be connected to somebody who's strong so you don't get picked on. So you probably align with the bullies and the tough kids. But what happens over time? So this is the question. What happens over time? Well, what happens is by senior high, those bi-strategic kids start to lose opposite sex friendships. And by senior high, it's the pro-social kids who have more opposite sex friendships. So there was
the flip. Yep.
Flip. So you start off, and I know this is junior high. We define it here as grade 8 to 10. That's a long time to have a disadvantage with the opposite sex. I remember that being a kind of important time, and I would have liked to have a girlfriend. But so it's 3 years of advantage. But eventually what we find is that it flips. And I think what's going on here is that over time, let's say you're friends with a bi-strategic kid and you're glad that they're picking on others and not you. Eventually, that's going to be turned on you. Eventually, something's going to happen in your relationship where that aggressive kid is going to do something that violates the friendship and it's going to be over. And that's what I think was happening. I mean, I think that the opposite sex friends got wise. They had enough repeated experiences that there was eventually a time where something went wrong that destroyed the friendship.
As they mature, they start to recognize that.
Yeah. And they just got more examples of it. So this is something we can talk about later. But one of the things for building trust is if you're going to build a culture of trust, you need to have lots of repeated experiences with the person. You can't really detect these antisocial aggressive people if they move from job to job, for example. They stayed in this job for 6 months, then they move to the next one, then they move to the next one. You need to have them over time when you can see it. I think that's what's happened here is that the bi-strategic kids had a disadvantage. And what's interesting is that, okay, so that's opposite sex. So the bi-strategic aggressive kids had advantage. But when we look at same-sex friendships, the pro-social kids always had an advantage. They always had more friends than the more aggressive kids. And again, I think that's because, let's say think about being an aggressive adolescent male. That may look sexy and cool to a girl, right? But amongst your mates, it's pretty unpleasant. So if in your group of mates, male mates, it's like aggression is affecting the hierarchy within your own, space. Do you know what I mean? Like, whereas boys don't normally compare themselves in female hierarchies. They don't say, well, I'm the most popular girl. They wouldn't say that. So I think when it's the same sex, that aggression kind of gets in the way of status fights and things like that. But opposite sex is not so much of an issue. But it's clear that aggression is really bad in the same sex relationships. So the cooperators, the pro-social kids had more friends, and this was throughout high school. And probably the last two results I'd like to mention before we kind of talk about implications and stuff is that there was a cost. So I said that the bi-strategics had more opposite sex friends for 3 years, which is a pretty good advantage, but there was a cost. And the cost was in well-being and self-esteem. So those kids that used aggressive strategies were less happy and had lower self-esteem throughout all of high school. So even though they had more girlfriends and boyfriends, they were more miserable. So this is an important thing
from year 8 to year 10, and ongoing from
ongoing,
11 to 12 as well. The
whole time from year 8 to 12, they were more miserable. So it's interesting because we see antisocial people being successful, and we only are seeing that aspect of it. We don't actually see how happy or satisfied they are with their life. That's the stuff that's invisible. We don't know what that's like. They could be quite miserable. And what we're showing is that they actually, if you just looked at popularity, especially in secondary school, or sorry, what was that? Yeah, junior high, they looked successful. They were popular. They had lots of friends, lots of female friends, lots of male friends. But
they're the envy. They're the ones we all envy. We want to be them, so to speak.
Like, oh, exactly. You're like, they're doing awesomely. But their well-being was much lower. So they're actually less happy. And I think this is because I'd speculate about this, but I think like social connection is a fundamental human need. We need each other. Even if we don't think we do, we do. So let's just say that's the premise. Even people who are antisocial need other people, need genuine connection. I'm just going to premise that. That could be controversial, but
that's pretty reasonable, though. I think all of us would kind of just reflect on our own lives and say, yes, that without our friends, without those to connect with, most of us are going to feel pretty miserable.
Yeah. So
and there's data that shows that as well in other research.
Absolutely. For example, I'll just give you an example of that, Nesh. Loneliness. So if somebody's lonely, that's as big a risk factor for ill health and death as being obese and smoking 10 cigarettes a day. So loneliness is an equal risk factor as those other two things that, the public targets those things. We got to reduce smoking. We have to promote physical health. And that's true, but loneliness is as big a risk factor for ill health and death. So that.
Well, yeah. I think Johan Hari spoke about how loneliness, he calls it bonding, is related to drug and alcohol use, drugs in particular. And, it's one of the biggest factors of why people continue to be in that cycle of drug use, that the more we can give them bonds, the less likely they are to engage in, drug taking and other sort of harming behaviors. So I think that premise that you hold is spot on.
Yeah. I mean, you can almost think of it as a nutrient. And so what happens when you do things that get you power, in this case, it's popularity, but don't let you form real relationships? Because if you're being aggressive, you're willing to hurt people. People are going to be a little cautious of you. They're going to be protective, even if they say they're your friend. I think what's happening is they're not forming genuine relationships, and that's costing them in the well-being and self-esteem.
That's the quality of the bond, the quality of and the number of quality bonds.
Yeah. And these people who are bi-strategic will say, oh no, my relationships are high quality, but I don't believe it. I think there's a kind of cynicism and negativity, a negative view of humans that goes with being aggressive, that just interferes with genuine relationships. It's like,
we've all felt it, right? We've all felt the wrath of unpleasantness, of someone being aggressive towards us. It's bloody horrible.
Exactly. And but what's interesting is what's it like for the aggressive person? And I believe it costs them. I mean, there may be a few sociopaths in the world who really don't react at all, but I think that's a very tiny group if they even exist.
Agreed.
So that was interesting, but there was one other interesting effect, which I wasn't sure about. We don't know why this is happening, but I think it's really important. There was a gender difference. So if you look at the numbers, right? So we know more males are antisocial, more females are bi-strategic. More females are pro-social, more males are non-strategic. So there were big gender differences in these strategies. But if you used an aggressive strategy, let's say bi-strategic or antisocial, and you were female, you had much worse well-being than if you were male. So the cost of using aggression was much higher for females than males.
The currency of pro-social with women is greater, is how I'm reading it at a first glance.
let me think. No, there wasn't any difference in well-being between the males and females if they were pro-social. But if you just focus in on let's say just by strategic, let's just look at the bi-strategic kids compared to all the others. The females were much worse, bi-strategics were much worse off than the males. It was a big negative effect. And that was really interesting. So it was like females being aggressive, it costs them more psychologically. Not every female. I don't want to make overgeneralizations, and not every male, but generally there was a cost. And I thought there could be two explanations for this. The first one could be when females use aggressive strategies, they're more punished by society because it's the gender inconsistent thing to do. So, the old thing where if a man is aggressive, he's seen as assertive, but if a woman's aggressive, she's seen as a bitch. It's really unfair. And these cultural stereotypes might actually be hurting women. That's one possibility.
Punished by their male counterparts or punished by their female? Do you think there would be a discrepancy between the male and the female?
That's really interesting. I'm not sure. I'm trying to think of Hillary Clinton and her, race to president, and was she attacked by males and females equally? I don't know. I can't speak to that, but I suspect it's both sides.
Because Julia Gillard got a decent, hiding as well. Being Prime Minister of Australia, there were all sorts of comments going left, right, and centre. I suppose I haven't measured, whether her male counterpart gets a lot of criticism as well, and whether there's a difference there. But she certainly cops some flack.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like females, for doing the same kind of rule-breaking behaviors, get punished much worse than males. I don't want to get too political, but it just seemed like that did play out in various elections where you had both politicians maybe doing questionable things, but one seemed to cop it much worse.
Maybe it stands out more because women being more agreeable on average than men, when they're not agreeable, maybe it stands out more because it's kind of something that's, is an outlier. And so we see it more.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. So it might just be more noticed as aggression, whereas the guy's just being a guy, It's totally unfair, by the way.
He's just naturally an ass.
Yeah. And, so while the important thing is, I think for this is we say, well, if women are to succeed in the workplace, I don't say this, but people say, they need to act assertive and aggressive. They need to act male-like. But what if these strategies don't work the same for everybody?
Yeah.
And there's some males like me where aggression, I don't really like being aggressive to people. I really hate it, which is ironic because I do martial arts and I do fighting as my sport, but it's not really about aggression But so the idea that there is a strategy that works for everybody all the time is probably wrong. It looks to me like some strategies are more costly to many females, and they probably costly to some males too. So not every strategy is beneficial to every person. And let me just wrap this up because I would like to get to some practical kind of implications and talk to you a bit more about what do we do. But I think what this research suggests is that being a kind person, a giver, doesn't always work in the short run, but it's a valuable long-term strategy. So Adam Grant has this quote, being a giver is not good for a 100-yard dash, but it's valuable in a marathon. And so, it's because there's a couple things that are required. As you engage with people over time, right, you start to form alliances. People start to know who they can trust. And the person who's a taker or an aggressive person who hurts others is likely to destroy that alliance. And in a modern world, those alliances are absolutely essential. We're a highly networked, interconnected world. And you know how people work. If you do something that really violates trust in some deep way, it's over. You'll never trust that person again. You know what I mean? And without those alliances, people can't. I don't think in this modern, interconnected, internet, linked world, you can get away with this stuff as much because remember what the rule is. You have to basically experience a person over time. So maybe in the 80s, you could go to Cleveland, you could work at a job for 2 years, be a complete prick, and then move to Kansas and do the same thing at that job workplace and keep moving around, and you could be a total sociopath and get away with it. But now, if I worked at Cleveland and I was a sociopath, I go to apply to Kansas, people would just Google me, and there'd be all these things about me, and it'd be like news stories, me being a sociopath. So our reputations follow us a bit more. So I actually think in the modern world, very networked world, it's good because reputations stay with you. That's a good thing, I think, because I think it will promote giving and pro-social behavior, I hope.
It's a really good point in terms of our reputations following us now, where it's harder to hide, it's harder to lie, it's harder to be, a sociopath. It tends to kind of easily follow you because of the distribution of information. It can be so easily done, and obviously Google will track it and make sure it does follow you.
Absolutely. Google tracks everything. Kind of scary. Yeah. Well, we won't talk about Google today, but I could have a whole hour about that and how
that's a black hole.
Yeah. It goes on forever. So the question
Tell me
is
about the implications. My apologies, I jumped in.
Oh, sorry. No, Nesh, that's totally fine. Well, look, I think one of the takeaways is that not every strategy works every time, and not every strategy works for every person. So this means that I can't say what the right strategy is for any given situation. And I've noticed this with working in schools and bullying. Like initially kids are taught to say, stop, I don't like it, and put their hand out like this, but that really stops working after a while. Or kids are told to tell the teacher, but that stops working after a while, and it doesn't work in every context. Sometimes it does work, and I do want to encourage kids to talk to adults about this stuff. But what we need really is a way of kind of helping people to engage in a process where they find the best strategy for themselves in any given situation. So I do want to talk to you about something we've done based on our book, The Thriving Adolescent, but we've got a new book coming out called Your Life, Your Way, and this is for young people.
Your Life, Your Way?
Yeah, that's the name of it. And this is a self-help book for young people. And one of the chapters is on how do you manage difficult people. And I think this applies to adults as well. And what we're hesitant to do is give people rules, like you should say, stop, I don't like it. You should always assert yourself. But what we do is have people go through what we call a discovery process. And this is where you are going to try different things and see what works. So we really get into trouble when we keep doing the same things and we keep getting bullied. So, bullying can last an entire year. Kids can be like avoiding school, vomiting, having nosebleeds, so anxious that they can't concentrate in school. And they will a lot of times keep doing the same kind of destructive strategies. Like I know when I was a kid, I got bullied a lot. And my strategy was to play nice. I keep playing nice and it would just increase the bullying, but I didn't change the strategy. So in our model, we call it discover, where we try new things and test it out.
Let me give you my story of discovery. I recall very, very clearly a conversation that my mum had with me. She's a beautiful woman, but she's a very strong, Eastern European woman. And I know I was being bullied at school, and this was in primary school. And I remember my mum saying to me in very, very clear terms, if someone goes out and they're going to hurt you or they're bullying you, and you feel scared, I give you permission to do what you need to do to hit him if need be.
Yeah.
And I was like in shock. I was like, what? I'm not going to be reprimanded, or I'm not going to get in trouble. Yeah. And the next day, sure enough, I was cornered by a big, strong, boy, because I was, very, very much underdeveloped as a young boy. And, he was pushing me around and, physically, sort of argy-bargy. And I remember for the first time I threw a punch and I snogged him right in the nose. Yeah. And he just stood there and he was in shock, and he didn't touch me ever again. And that became, I'm not saying we should go out and do this, don't do this at home, kids. But that became one of my strategies, as a young man. I formulated this idea that, never again will someone physically go out and assault me. And if they do, they're going to know about it. And so I had that reputation shortly after because I'd, snogged the biggest guy, but I wasn't out for a fight. It's just that the bully stopped targeting me. They continued with others, but I was now off the list.
Yeah. And I've heard stories like that. And just to show how variable this is, it doesn't work for everybody. I mean, I had a story like that where I kept going along with the bullying, and finally, and I was told to do the same thing, but then I hit a kid smaller than myself. Because basically I waited, and I didn't apply it very well, and I got just expelled from school. And it wasn't seen as – it did seem to slow the bullying down a little bit, but not much.
Yeah.
And there are some kids for whom that doesn't work very well for them. They just don't have that – maybe everybody could do it. I don't know, but like I say, like every strategy depends on the situation that worked for you. So being a discoverer in our model is doing something and paying attention to whether it works or not. Does it work?
I do need to say I had a lot of conviction at that point in what I was doing. At that point, I somewhat embraced it. It wasn't a hesitant theory. At that point, I was like, I can't live like this anymore, and I'm going to protect myself. So, but as you say, this is definitely not I'm not promoting that strategy, and nor do I think it works for everyone by any means. I reckon it could make it worse in some instances, for sure.
That's the tricky part. It's very hard to have it. I've sought for a single thing to tell kids because they just want to know a single thing to make the bullying stop.
Of course.
I've worked with kids who are bullied, and and I tell you, parents, they've tried. It's been years, and they're kind of using the same strategies again and again. So one of the things to do is to get them to start to try different strategies. And so we have this kind of 2x2 way of kind of thinking about what you could possibly do. And it kind of mirrors the study I just reported. So you got strategies that have to do with the self. So like you could be neutral or you could be kind of positive and kind. And then we have strategies. So that's the self strategies. And then we have strategies to do with others. You could ignore or escape the other person, or you could be assertive or aggressive, right? So you could think of it as a 2x2. So for example, if I was being neutral with myself and neutral towards others, I might just escape the situation. If I was being neutral but strong towards others, I might just be assertive or aggressive. If I was being so let's see, so the neutral social strategy but strong self strategy, I might just be really kind, polite, empathic. So let's say you did something. Let me just give examples. So let's say you're bullying me. Okay. So the neutral strategy would be I just escape and ignore you. That might work. So we could generate all kinds of strategies like that where I'm not being positive and I'm not really engaging in the situation at all.
Sure, you just hide.
Escape, or let's say it's just a one-off. I mean, there might be instances. So what we want to do is not
one-off. Yes. Okay.
We don't want to be judged. The trick is to, as a discoverer, just to be open to all possibilities. Sure, we're going to reject a lot of these.
Curiosity. With curiosity is what I'm hearing. Yes.
Yes, curiosity, interest. Because the problem is when we're being treated badly by somebody, we start to narrow our focus. We keep repeating the same things. We keep ruminating. We kind of get stuck.
We want to hold an exploratory position in these instances to kind of experiment to see what might occur. Could it be potentially better at some point?
Yeah. So it's a 2x2. This is just a way of forcing yourself to think of all the possible ways you might act. So the neutral one is kind of like our non-strategic. It's almost non-strategic, but it isn't non-strategic because you do remove yourself or ignore it or pretend like the person didn't say it, and that might happen sometimes. Now, neutral, where I'm not being positive, but I'm actually, let's say you're picking on me, but I'm doing something to influence you. I could be assertive or aggressive, so I could tell you just to leave me alone. If I'm really good at cut downs, I might try and cut you down. So I'm not being pleasant at all. I'm just asserting myself or being aggressive. So that's a strategy that's a set of strategies you could use. That works for some kids. Some kids are really good at put down. Some kids are good at punching. But those would fall in the neutral kind of strong social power category. So neutral, I don't know if it's negative, but you know what I mean. And then you have what is the kind of pro-social category, which is where you're just nice. So you be mean to me, and I'm like, why are you doing that? I think of you as a friend, Nesh. I don't understand. This really hurt my feelings. So it's a purely playing nice strategy. And the fourth strategy is kind of like bi-strategic, but it's not only aggression. So that's where you're both kind, nice, but you're also standing up for yourself. So look, Nesh, I'm going to hang out with a different group today because I think you're being a bit mean to me, but it's, look, I still think of you as my friend. Let's catch up tomorrow. So that would be a strategy that had both positive aspects coming from me, but also I was also asserting myself. So it has both. I could say, I see you're upset, and you think I was gossiping about you, but I wasn't. I'm not. So I'm kind of validating you, but at the same time, I'm still asserting that's not true.
Yes.
So that has both the positive and the negative in it. And so, like, you can generate strategies for each of these. So your punching strategy was just not self. There was no positivity. It was just asserting yourself. My being nice all the time was in that kind of, the pro-social category. And that didn't really work, but it might work sometimes. The escape strategy, I also used that. That didn't really work well for me a lot of times. But it does work sometimes when you can just ignore it and it just goes away. And then the one where you combine being nice with being assertive or aggressive is another possibility. And so we encourage people to kind of go through all of these possibilities and then kind of make a guess of what's going to work best and then give it a try. So being a discoverer means you try it and you see what happens next. And
in a one scenario to kind of your kind of experience the scenario, you decide, how am I going to play this one out? Take a bit of feedback, and then rinse, repeat, do it again until you kind of, I suppose, start to appreciate what the different. Actually, I'm hearing kind of you get to broaden your skill basis to actually have choice of which one to use in that context, rather than just holding your own bias. Because I think I'm an escaper. I'll just kind of hear it out and tend to kind of scoot off.
Yeah. And we all have our biases. We've been raised a certain way. We interact in certain ways. So we tend to go to a default way of acting with others. Some of us are super agreeable. Some of us tend to be really aggressive and dominant. Some of us are just escapers or avoiders. And maybe that strategy, it works for you sometimes, but it won't work all the time.
No.
And so this is just a method of kind of pushing you to explore all those possibilities of how you might act. And you might find out, wow, that didn't work at all. I've done this thing, the one where you're kind of assertive, but not really positive with a narcissist, and it really backfired. It made that person even more negative. But I was like, oh, okay, that didn't work. And actually with that guy, the only way was to ignore him. There was nothing else I could do. There was no other strategy. I tried being nice as well, and it didn't work. So so this is a lot about psychological flexibility, this idea and act that you persist in what works. But when it stops working, you change, you try new things. And we have all of acceptance commitment therapy, and what we've written about is about helping people to become more like that. Well, with social strategies, it's the same way. It's that we get into trouble when we keep doing the same thing we were taught by our parents or we learned as a child that doesn't work. And so I like what you say about broadening and building, because I'm like, okay, because I tried something new with this narcissist that didn't work. Okay, you could say that was a fail. But actually it wasn't, because now I learned, okay, in this situation, that probably isn't such a good strategy, because it just enrages a narcissist even more to assert them. They consider it a personal insult and they come after you. So that was really a good learning experience. So the more we kind of experiment and are able to do trial and error and go beyond what our dominant response is, the more we'll learn about what works for us in particular.
Because there's a lot of complexity as well as to the individual person. If you're I forgot the category, the disorganized, you don't have a position. You don't use a strategy.
No strategies,
no
non-strategic.
strategy.
Yeah.
If you're a no strategy and you try and be, particularly assertive, that's going to be experienced very different than someone who is, let's say, more on the antisocial, and they're being, assertive, and they might get a better response than their usual. Obviously for them as well, get a better response.
That's true. That's a good point. So there's going to be different effects for each of the kids. So some people say, "Oh, come up with smart comebacks," but some kids aren't very good at that.
They can't do that. They're not. Their mind isn't that quick or witty that you can just kind of bring something up. The anxiety response is flooding them. You can't think of something, as a comeback to, your mum this, your mum that, or something that everyone laughs about. You can't do it. Yeah.
So you've just got it with each kid, and each person who's being mean might be a little different as well. You're right. Ironically, a lot of the aggressive kids do get bullied. They will say they get bullied. They're more likely to get bullied. And so for them to manage that might look like a very different strategy. For them, maybe being nice will be just experienced as completely shocking and incredibly effective. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I imagine they would get bullied lots, because if you're dishing it out, and you're being aggressive towards others, you're going to meet enough other people who, will have both pro and the aggressive position. They'll give it back.
Yeah, I've heard this about talking to big guys especially, and they say people always pick fights with them. It's like being in prison. You go and pick the fight with the biggest dude just to prove yourself. And yeah, you're right. That could be happening. So each person, it's going to be different, and the situation is going to be different. So this is so there's a lot more work that goes behind this than I've just talked about the 4 different ways you could respond, but we use ACT principles and our model DNAV to help people to kind of deal with, for example, to be willing to have the difficult feelings that come with asserting yourself, for example. Or here's the thing, a lot of times doing the right thing involves letting something go, because anything you do would just make it worse, right? So let's say somebody has just done something really aggressive, but anything you do with that person will make you more engaged with them. So if you don't actually like the person, but they did something mean, you might want to feel like you got to confront them. You may feel like that would really make me feel good. I know you've been gossiping about me, and so I want to go up and confront you about that, right? But that might not be the best strategy, because what might happen is the person will deny it, and then they might attack you some more and gossip some more about you. And so suddenly you're getting more and more entangled with somebody you don't like, right?
Yeah.
So this sucks. Do you know what I mean? This happens all the time. You get more involved with people you don't like. You spend less time with the people you actually like, because you're thinking about this bastard who said this to me, and then I said this to them. And so ironically, the best strategy often requires you to be willing to not feel right, to not get revenge. Ooh. Which totally sucks.
Ouch. Yeah. That's a hard one, but definitely a extremely reasonable position.
It doesn't feel good. So a lot of times, if the kids gossip about you and they probably said some stuff, but on the whole, they've been nice to you, maybe that's not the best time to confront. I don't know. You'd have to, but you want to be righteous. You want to go up and say something to that person, but that may not be the best move. So if you don't do it, let's say you go to that ignore or escape category, that's really unsatisfying, because if you don't act like a bastard, nobody notices that you're not acting like a bastard. You don't get a prize for not being a bastard, right? It just seems like you're just being normal. So it's really, in a way, it's not satisfying at all, to not act like a bastard. But it's often the best strategy. Even if nobody notices that, in fact, hey, you've ignored this, you've allowed this to be, and you haven't done anything about it because it would make things worse.
Interestingly, though, I and maybe this is just in my mind, but I think people would notice it. Not in the short game, as we've spoken about. I think in the long game, people would notice that, because that's your reputation, that you don't get entangled with those people. But certainly not in the short game. And when you're feeling hurt, when you're feeling attacked, if someone's gone out and gossiped about you, your first instance might be to actually go out and try and defend yourself or, confront
Yeah.
the person. But I think the long game, which is what you raised very early on, being the marathon runner will probably shape that. That becomes more of your reputation, that you can kind of not let those things get to you.
Yeah, I think you could be right. That's really interesting. I mean, it'd be very interesting research to do to see if people who are effective at using that ignoring or letting go, ignoring is probably the wrong word, but just letting it go kind of strategy, if people notice that. A lot of times they don't, but you're right. In the long term, they think back of you and they think, oh, that person hasn't lost their cool or got caught up in this stuff. You know what I mean? So maybe it's over time.
And it also probably shapes, just thinking out aloud, shapes your social network. When you start letting that be and letting it go, you're spending more time with others, bonding with those more robust kind connections. And I think, it means that we give less fuel to those ones that are harming.
Yeah, absolutely. You get less entangled. I mean, it's so easy to get entangled with the negative people in your life, and you end up spending so much time with them instead of with your loved ones, psychologically, I mean.
Yeah, the amount of time, and that's it. We're not measuring time in actual physical. It's time in your head that you're spending thinking about the bully.
Absolutely. I mean, you're at home, you've set up some nice rose petals for your partner to come and lay down in the bed, and you set up this romantic thing, and the whole time you're thinking, damn it, I can't believe that person said that to me. I'm not going to let this stand. I got to send an email. Sorry, darling, I just got to do something first before I get into bed. And then, sorry, darling, I'm just not in the mood. Like it can just dominate everything.
You don't see yourself. You don't seem yourself tonight.
Yeah, that's right. Because I've basically brought my enemy home with me, and they're laying in bed with me virtually. Because
is there something wrong? Have I done something wrong?
Yeah, that's right. No, I just brought somebody home from work, and I'm just hanging out with them psychologically. Sorry, darling. Yeah.
Gosh, we're bringing them to bed, so to speak, aren't we?
Absolutely, everywhere. It's because the human mind is predisposed towards threat and problems, and it gives very high priority to the negative. So like if if you're giving a talk to 20 people and there's 2 people in the audience who are hating on you and there's 18 that are loving you, you're going to be focused on those 2, really. You're going to be thinking, what am I doing wrong? We've all had that experience where like, well, most people liked it, but what's wrong with this person? And we dwell more on that 1 or 2 than the 18.
I tell you what, when I was doing act workshops, I remember there was a person who left and they were cranky at the time. And I still vividly remember that, even though at the end of the workshop, you do your feedback and, lots of smiles and thank yous and so on and so forth. But I felt dreadful.
Yeah. It's very powerful. Social rejection.
Yeah. Well, that's the currency, as you said at the very, very, very start. The resource we're all battling for in that jungle is, is connections, bonding, social, networks.
Yeah, so think about it. So we say social connection is like a nutrient that if you don't have it, you start to die, you start to get sick. And so you can think, if that's true, then social rejection, holy cow. You can imagine, being left alone by your tribe in a dangerous kind of environment, woods or something, and, other people were the biggest danger to humans, in primitive evolutionary times. So we both absolutely need humans, and we are terrified of them. So this is the human struggle.
Geez, that sums it up so beautifully, doesn't it? We need our fellow human, and we're terrified of our fellow human.
Yeah.
Wow. Joe, I might leave it there. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you and looking at your fascinating research. I think the world is a better place for people like yourself doing this sort of research, because it really allows us to start to think about how can we, do life better? How do we deal with those difficult people, and how can I develop myself and explore different strategies and to know there's a real strong sort of research that backs that up. is priceless. So, really, really appreciate and thank you. And can you tell our listeners how they can get in contact with you?
Yeah. Look, maybe some things can put on the website, but my website is josephciarrochi.com. So my name.com. We also have a good website that has lots of resources called thrivingadolescent.com. That's with Louise Hayes, and that's a really useful one for if you're a practitioner. That paper, maybe I'll share with you a link, Nesh. It is open access, so people can freely download and read the research paper.
Oh, wonderful. We'll definitely put up a link.
So I'll send you a few links, and people can kind of get more information that way.
And the link will be available on neshnikolic.com. So we'll definitely make sure that link is up.
Yep.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very, very much, Joe. It's been amazing, and I can't wait to have you on again to hear about your next research. What are you doing at the moment? Is there any other sort of works in the pipeline?
Yeah. Well, I'm doing a lot of stuff. What's really interesting me now is, what are the core ingredients in effective therapy? And I'm working with, people like Steve Hayes and Stephen Hoffman to kind of try and identify core components that you could talk about across all therapies. So what are the core ingredients, because we live in a very fragmented universe as practitioners where everybody has a package, everybody has a model. And it's very confusing to people who are trying to improve the human condition. So I'm really interested in unifying that and helping people to see the common processes across therapy.
Joe, I'm about to rip my hair out of excitement. That sort of research has been in my mind for such a long time of wanting to know, what's that ingredient, the element that makes exceptional therapy. Exceptional versus what we all do, because we often talk about this model versus that model and look at evidence-based, but we can often go out and see two practitioners doing the exact same model, but they're getting very different results. What is it that makes this specific practitioner amazing and another practitioner is not getting the same sort of results, so to speak? So I will be looking forward to that one. Is that several years that sort of down the line as well?
No, I could talk about it now if you'd like, but we don't have time today. But we've been doing this for ages, so yeah.
Well, so now that I know you, I think you've just scored yourself another invite.
All right, sounds good. It's been fun.
Fantastic. Thanks, Joe, and look forward to having you back soon.
Okay, thank you, Nesh.